Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend the caller What If, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is series a What If Deku had thunder lighting power. Izuku Midoriya was no ordinary 14-year-old kid. He wasn't ordinary because he didn't have something to make him stand out. To make him special. To make him be able to be a hero. For in a world of quirks and superhuman powers, being without one made him an abnormality. An outcast of society. It had been a rough day for Izuku. He was currently sitting on the ledge of a skyscraper's rooftop somewhere in Musudafu. His tear-stricken face only illuminated by the occasional lightning of the furious thunderstorm that was raging all around him. Izuku's eyes were a hard contrast to the seemingly everlasting storm. Where the downpour was full of energy and movement, his eyes were empty. Void of any emotion. He did not understand why he took today's belittlements and insults so hard. He was used to it. Since the fateful doctor visit 10 years ago, all he was met with was pity and insults at best. And beatings or burn marks from his own personal tormentor at worst. But when his old childhood friend turned tormentor Katsuki Bakugo had told him to take a swan dive off the roof and hope for a quirk in his next life, something inside him had started to fracture. Like a mirror that was hit with a hammer, that something had shattered into thousands of pieces. But the final blow came from his idol All Might, who had told him straight to his face that he could not become a hero. When Izuku heard those words, the already fractured thing broke completely. And he did not know if it could ever be fully repaired again. Be whole again. He honestly did not think so. Another flash of lightning rocketed through the darkness and illuminated the rooftop for a second or two. Izuku took a deep shuddering breath and moved to stand up. His whole body was shivering. His muscles refusing to work properly. They were stiff from the hours he had been sitting there, not moving an inch, except for the occasional shivers and tremors that had wrecked his entire body. He did not know if they were related to the coldness or the shattering of the thing inside of him. But it did not matter to him now. Nothing did. He stood up stiffly and tilted his head back so he could gaze into the darkness that was tonight's sky. Another shuddering breath and he took a step backwards towards the rooftop exit. What time is it? How long have I been up here? Izuku thought as he slowly and stiffly worked his way forward. He hugged himself and rubbed his arms in a futile attempt to rid them of the lingering coldness that had invaded his whole body. He did not even know why he had stayed up here in the first place. He just wanted to get away from everything. From all the eyes that judged him. All the mouths that insulted him. And all the people who hurt him. Another couple of lightning bolts rocketed through the night, immediately followed by a booming thunder. Looks like the storm is directly above me now. There wasn't even half a second between the thunder and the lightning strike. The storm seemed to grow even wilder. Where before he had only seen the occasional lightning bolt that disappeared into nothingness, there were now increasingly more of them arching through the air. Izuku was jolted out of his musings when a lightning bolt impacted into the other side of the roof. Shit, I must get off this roof. This has just turned into a lightning storm and I am standing atop the highest building in the city. He forced his stiff legs to move faster as more and more lightning bolts impacted all around him, leaving small smoking dents in the roof. Come on, only a couple more meters to go. Izuku reached forward, ready to turn the doorknob as soon as it came into his reach. He did not dare look back, as the hairs in his neck started to stand up from the electricity in the surrounding air. More and more lightning bolts impacted with the rooftop all around him as he finally reached the door and turned the knob. Nothing happened. The door did not budge. It was locked, and thus, remained tightly shut. Izuku frantically rattled the doorknob and pulled with all the strength he had. Just as he looked over his shoulder to see where the lightning was colliding with the roof, he saw a giant arc of electricity work its way towards him from the darkness above. The lightning bolt illuminated the area around him as if it were day, and with a gigantic thunderclap that threatened to deafen him, impacted into him, and Izuku's world turned dark. Of thunder and lightning, the first thing Izuku felt when he regained consciousness was a lightness in his whole body, as if something was boosting him upwards. The second thing was the soreness that permeated his whole body. He could hear the distant sounds of the city life beneath him and the swirling wind all around him. Izuku hesitantly cracked an eye open. He was met with impenetrable darkness. He forced his sore limbs into a sitting position. Shaking his head to clear his mind, he tried to make sense of his surroundings. He abruptly stopped moving as the events of the last 24 hours rushed back into his mind. It was like a sucker punch to the gut, as all the pain and misery filled his mind again. He buried his head in his hands, attempting to shield himself from the painful memories. A bright light suddenly lit up his surroundings and startled him out of his own thoughts. He blankly looked at the source of the light. Where his right arm should have been, he was met with millions of white and blue arcs of lightning, that now formed his arm and illuminated his surroundings. Izuku slowly turned his glowing appendage from one side to the other, waving it in front of his face. It was definitely his hand. It had to be. He could move it around easily enough. He hesitantly pressed his left index finger into the palm of his right hand. And sure enough, he could feel his hand, as if it wasn't currently made up of electricity. But he could feel that too. The ever-moving and powerful arcs of lightning. He could feel them, and they did not hurt him. They felt somewhat nice, warm and soothing. Is this my quirk? Did I finally manifest my very own quirk? Excitement began to bubble up inside him. I can be a hero like All Might. As soon as the thought entered his mind, his excitement died down again. A hero like All Might? Izuku scoffed at the thought. Why would he want to become anything like All Might? After everything that had happened to Izuku, he couldn't stop himself from resenting the very idea that someone like All Might was considered a hero. That he had considered him a hero. Sure, he was strong and powerful and fought villains. But Izuku now knew that everything the man supposedly stood for was nothing more than a farce. A blatant lie he told the world. No, All Might was not a true hero. Izuku's train of thought ended abruptly, when he was once more enveloped by darkness, as his hand reverted to its original state. Had he imagined it? No, his right hand was made of electricity just a couple seconds ago. He was sure of it. Had it been only temporarily? Was it gone for good? No, he would not allow himself to think like that. If this was his quirk, then maybe it had a trigger, like so many other quirks he had catalogued and analyzed over the years. Yes, that had to be it. So what was the trigger? Thinking back to when he first noticed it, he was in deep thought about what had happened to him, and emotions. A lot of quirks get activated accidentally under extreme emotional duress. Like when Dad got that call from work years ago that made him so mad, he started breathing fire and melted the phone. So far that's the only lead I have. I can't really control it yet. That's something to figure out later. After I get down from this roof. Izuku slowly righted himself and stood up. He tried to recall how it had happened the first time around and tried to deliberately get himself into another emotional roller coaster. It turned out to be easier than he originally thought. While still focusing on the emotional anguish and self-pity that he had been in for years on end, He also willed his right hand to revert back into the millions of bolts of pure energy that he had seen before. Nothing happened. He stood there in complete darkness for several minutes. And nothing happened. He had to be looking like quite the idiot. Standing there with his right arm outstretched in front of him. His face scrunched up into an anguished expression. God damn it! Izuku screamed. I can't get anything to work. But why would I? I'm nothing but a pathetic idiot. I'm nothing but a Deku. The moment the last word escaped his lips, his whole body was glowing. He could see his right arm, still outstretched in front of him, formed by countless bolts of electricity. He could feel his whole body transform into ever-moving white and blue bolts of power. Yes, I did it. I really did it. Izuku couldn't stop himself from screaming from the top of his lungs. He walked the last couple of steps towards the now brightly illuminated door. His every movement felt more powerful. While he was still sore, he could feel the new element his body was now formed of radiating with pent-up power. Ready to be released. For the first time in Izuku's life, he felt powerful. In control. He reached for the doorknob and twisted it. The door was still closed. Obviously. Izuku mentally facepalmed. How did he forget the fact that he was still stuck here? Wait. He had power now. He focused on the hand that held the doorknob and willed it to transfer some of the pent-up energy into the cold, wet metal. He watched as some bolts of electricity started to arc around his fingers. But that wasn't enough. He needed to emit more, or he wouldn't be able to escape his momentary prison. Izuku's walk home was long and awkward. Not only was he wearing tattered and burned clothes, but parts of his body randomly reformed into what he had dubbed his elemental state of being. They would stay in that state for varying amounts of time, no matter how hard he focused on it. He had no control over it. He really was not bothered by it too much now, if he was to be honest with himself. He was far too emotionally drained by today's events to really care. Well, at least it keeps me warm. Not like the tatters I'm wearing will do that, were Izuku's thoughts as he looked at what was left of his sleeves. It took him a good 2 hours of constant maneuvering around the city to reach the apartment building he and his mother called home. He knew she most likely was worried sick about him. While he did not know how long he was atop the skyscraper, he knew it had to have been several hours into the next day. And he had been expected to be home sometime around noon the previous day. In short, he was way beyond being just late. He slowly ascended the staircase and made his way towards their apartment. Izuku closed his eyes and took a deep breath, readying himself for what he knew was to come. Hoping for the best, he turned the key and opened the apartment door. Inko Midoriya was many things. A loving mother, honest and truthful, and the only person to have ever really cared about Izuku. But she was not particularly emotionally stable. So, it was no surprise to Izuku when it took his mother all but 3 seconds to envelop him in a tearful hug. Oh, Izuku, you were safe. I was so worried. After what I heard about Katsuki being attacked by a villain, I was so worried when you didn't come home last night. Inko sobbed into what remained of his clothes. Izuku started to slowly pat her back, trying to comfort her as best as he could. Which, looking at his life as a social outcast so far, turned out to be rather lacking and awkward. He never was comforted himself. Only belittled, or laughed at, or worse. Mom, it's okay. I'm fine. Izuku tried to assure her, while still awkwardly patting her back, in what he thought of an encouraging way. He quickly thought about just omitting what had happened to him, like he always had in the past, when he came home burned or bruised from his most recent bout with his friends. But where he once felt guilty and obligated to keep everyone happy, to not worry or get into trouble on his account, he now only felt the strong desire to do right by people. To do right by himself. Which was weird enough in and of itself. At least for Izuku, who usually was just as emotional as his mother. And never really considered himself to be deserving of anything. "Mom, look at me. I'm fine." Izuku took her by the shoulder and pushed her back a little. That turned out to be the wrong move to make. Apparently, his mother had not really noticed, or seen the state he was in before. Now however, her tearful eyes widened, as she took him in completely. "Izuku, my baby, what happened to you? Where does it hurt? Do we need to go to a doctor?" She started to frantically check every part of his body she could reach, for injuries. She abruptly stopped when she lifted the bottom of his burned shirt and saw his abdomen, which was currently in its elemental state. Ever-moving blue and white bolts of electricity. "Mom, please listen to me. I'm okay." Izuku quickly grabbed her wrist and moved a couple steps back. The electricity did not hurt him. But after what he had done to the doorknob, he was not so sure if it was safe for others to touch him now. Especially since he could not control it yet. "I know I don't look like it right now. But I am fine. As to what happened to me, that's a bit more difficult to explain." Izuku sighed. This was going to take a while. And if he was unable to get his mother to calm down, it would be damn near impossible to get anything done. But after another 10 minutes of Izuku reassuring his mother while trying to stay at a safe distance away from her, and her tearfully calling the police to tell them that he came home, they were finally able to sit down at the kitchen table where Izuku began to explain what had happened to him. He started with his most recent encounter with Bakugo, telling her everything about from what had been done to him physically and emotionally. When he told her about Bakugo's advice regarding him gaining a quirk by throwing himself off a rooftop, Inko broke down again. He thought about taking a break to try and console his crying mother right then, but Izuku was resolved to get it all out into the open now. So, he kept talking about his encounter with the sludge villain and his meeting with All Might afterwards, and how the man had swiftly and cruelly shot his dreams and ambitions down. About how he had felt afterwards, sitting on the ledge of the skyscraper amidst the storm. About how he got hit by a lightning strike and how he discovered his new abilities soon afterwards. When he finally got to the end of his story, he stood up and walked over to the other side of the table to crouch down next to Inko. "I know there is a lot I just dumped on you, Mom, and I know we need to talk about it more, but I had a really long day, and I am beyond being just exhausted. Is it okay with you if we pick up from here tomorrow? I just want to head to bed now and sleep." "Of course, sweetie. That's all right." Izuku nodded and stiffly made his way towards his room. He walked in and silently closed the door behind him and sighed. He was greeted by close to 100 smiling faces of All Might. To him, the smile almost seemed mocking now. It used to be a comforting smile that encouraged him to dream on. To let himself believe that he too could become a hero, regardless of his quirk or lack thereof. But he could see past the facade now. Past the lies. Izuku sighed and closed his eyes while he leaned back on the door. This stuff had to go. He would not be able to rest otherwise. It took Izuku longer than he would like to admit to anyone to remove every All Might memorabilia and poster he owned. He stashed all of it in an unused closet. It would not do to just throw it all away. No matter how much he would like to do just that, or even better, burn them all, They were worth quite a lot of money and it would be better to hold on to them and sell them later. His room was now basically empty. Apart from his bed, the desk and chair, as well as 2 lamps, nothing of note had survived his purge. He would have to make do without a bed sheet as well. The thought of sleeping in a bed covered by All Might's face sent a shiver down his spine. And not in a good way. He thought about taking a shower first, but quickly dismissed the idea and settled on simply removing what remained of his clothes, letting them fall where he stood, and slipped into bed clad only in his boxers. Which thankfully were no All Might merchandise. They were in his colors, though. Red, blue and gold. He suppressed a sigh. His last conscious thought before finally drifting off to sleep was something that he would really have to think more carefully about in the future. I hope I don't set my bed on fire while I sleep. Inko meanwhile slowly but forcefully pulled herself from the emotional downward spiral she had been in for the last 24 hours in general and the last hour specifically. Everything that had happened to her sweet Izuku seemed almost too despicable and absurd to be true. But it had to be. He would never lie about something like that. Even trough all her guilt, she felt amazed that Izuku had held on to his dreams for so long. Especially under the newly revealed circumstances. He had not backed down. Not given an inch. It was admirable that he had not broken earlier. But she had had no part in it. Quite the contrary. She had been the first person to deny him his dream. His own mother. She had never gotten over what she told him after the doctor visit 10 years ago. She had felt so guilty for not giving him a quirk and was so caught up in her own emotions, that all logical reasoning had escaped her back then. That would have to change. She promised to herself and Izuku. Whatever would happen from now on, she would do everything she could to support him in achieving his dreams. No matter if they had changed or not. But while she was relieved that Izuku was back and at least seemed to be physically well, she could not stop herself from being concerned about his emotional and mental well-being. No one lived through all that and came out unscathed. And he had changed. In the span of 24 hours, he had changed dramatically. And he did not seem to have noticed it yet himself. Where he just yesterday would have been an emotional, stuttering mess, especially when faced with her own outbursts. He now had just comforted her. It had been unskilled and awkward, but he persisted, nonetheless. And throughout the retelling of his story, he had not once stuttered and had held eye contact with her, no matter how much it must have hurt him to relive what he had told her. The worst change, however, was that he did not smile. Not at all. No awkward smile to try and reassure her of his well-being. No happy smile when he talked about his newfound quirk. Nothing. And it was scaring her. Izuku had always smiled, no matter the situation. It was not like his face had been void of emotion either. Quite the contrary. She had been able to clearly see all the hurt and pain he had felt when talking about Katsuki and All Might. And some not so subtle disgust when talking about the latter. But it seemed like somewhere between Katsuki and his meeting with the pro-hero, Izuku had lost a part of himself. Had lost his smile. And it hurt her like nothing had ever before. Especially considering her own part in it. Izuku woke up to the sun shining brightly, illuminating his room. He guessed it had to be around midday. Without his now packed away All Might clock, he had no way of confirming it. The school day would be over by now as well. So, there was no point in hurriedly getting ready to leave. Looks like Mom let me sleep in and skip school. He breathed in and out deeply and stared at the ceiling. Had yesterday really happened? Yes. If the lack of his hero merchandise was the first hint, the raw power he felt all through his body was a dead giveaway. There was much to do. He thought. He would need to study and experiment with his quirk. The other applicants for the hero schools had close to a decade of time to get used to and train their quirk. He would have all but 11 months to get into fighting shape. It would be tough, but if pretenders like All Might and others like him could become powerful, so could he. And he would become a true hero. Izuku stood up, grabbed a change of clothes and made his way towards the bathroom. The hallway was empty and the flat was clouded in silence. Looks like Mom went out for the day. Izuku murmured while making his way towards the flat's little bathroom that he shared with his mother. He dropped his clothes on a bathroom cabinet next to the sink. He stopped dead in his tracks, eyes wide as he caught his image in the mirror hanging right above it. Countless white and red scars made their way all over his upper body, having their starting point right at his sternum and flowing downward. Like an intricate tattoo, they showed the way the electricity took in his body. He turned his left shoulder around to have a look at his back, where he was originally hit by the lightning bolt. And sure enough, he found a red and white circle right where his spine connected with his skull, with small fissure-like scars arching outwards. Well, this isn't so bad. They don't hurt and actually look kind of cool. Izuku mumbled while tracing some of the bigger scars on the left part of his chest. He turned fully and turned the water on in the shower. He removed the last piece of clothing he had on and started to make his way into the shower when a sudden thought made him once again freeze in place. I'm either made of or parts of me turn into electricity. Would the water hurt me? Could it short-circuit me and leave me incapacitated? Could it kill me? Shit, this is bad. Izuku stumbled backwards away from the flowing water as if he were burned. He took a couple deep breaths to steady himself. Okay, yesterday I was laying on that roof for who knows how many hours. And it was raining heavily for at least the beginning after I was hit by lightning. So, thinking logically, water should not have any effect on me. Right, but I do not know if parts of me changed into its electrical state of being while I was unconscious. And if it only affects me when I am changed. And when I woke up and started to notice it, the rain had already stopped, and while I was still wet, that does not necessarily mean anything. Izuku stopped his mumbling when he realized that there was no way around testing it. And now was as good a time as any. He carefully reached forward with his right hand, which was currently unchanged. He readied himself and put it into the water stream. Nothing happened. He sighed in relief. Water was not his ultimate enemy just yet. The only problem remaining now was that he did not know how water would affect him in his elemental state, and that he currently had no way of stopping parts of him fluctuating between the two states. He would eventually have to test how water did affect him in that state, but he figured he should not be alone for that part. Izuku sighed and carefully reached around the stream to turn the water off again. He would have to settle for lick and a promise for now. The whole process of slowly and carefully washing himself with a washcloth was rather idiotic. Even more so when it took him more than half an hour to do it. Washing your own back while trying to keep watch of any signs of electricity was rather awkward. But at least he felt somewhat clean again. It would not do to get his fresh set of clothes dirty so soon. He did not really own a lot right now. At least no All Might unrelated ones. He would have to go shopping very soon. A soft knock at the door pulled him out of his musings. Izuku. Are you Alri? Is everything okay in there? Inko stopped herself from asking if he was all right. She knew he wasn't. His mom had apparently come back. Yeah, Mom, everything is fine. I'll be out in a minute. Okay, I bought takeout. You must be hungry, right? You have no idea, Mom. I'm starving. Thanks, was Izuku's reply as he opened the bathroom door and was faced with the shaky-looking smile of his mother. It had been 3 months since Izuku got hit by lightning. 3 months of being on quirk leave from school. 3 months of experimenting with his quirk. And 3 months of trial and error. Izuku spent all his time either at home, studying up on anything related to electricity in general or lightning in particular, and filling his newly christened Hero Analytics for the Future, Living Lightning notebook. Or at his training facility, if you could call it that. After selling most of his All Might merchandise, he had been able to rent an old, abandoned factory floor for the months leading up to the UA entrance exam. Since the laws forbade the use of quirks in public spaces like parks and beaches, he needed a place to practice. And he figured that unleashing pure electricity in his room at home was a bad idea. That was where Izuku currently was. And he was hitting a wall. Both literally and figuratively. After researching electricity-related quirks and experimenting on his own, Izuku's understanding of his power had increased by leaps and bounds. But while the understanding of his ability had grown quite considerably, he could not say the same about his control. He knew of at least a dozen applications of his power which, at least in theory, he should be able to produce. But his quirk seemed to be an absolute mess in what it allowed him to do. While he was now able to turn his entire body into lightning on will, he was not able to change the shape of it. His muscles and organs would be made of electricity, but they still had the same shape and function. And while they would be enhanced in terms of strength, speed and durability, he was not able to alter their form. Another problem he had was controlling the electricity. He was able to regulate his power output, which allowed him various moves like his stunning strike, where he released between 500,000 and 1 million volt in a short, concentrated burst. Just enough to either incapacitate someone by overriding the body's muscle triggering mechanisms, or straight up knocking them out. But the second the electricity left his body, he had very little control over it. And the further away it got, the less control he had. The only time he had any control over the released electricity was when he was fully transformed, and his entire body consisted of lightning bolts. His body would charge the air surrounding him and he was able to keep the electricity from getting too far away from him, forming a protective barrier around him, which he had dubbed his lightning armor. It was not a physical shield, but anyone who was near him would be hurt by it. But once again, that was all the control he could exert over it. He could not shape it into anything else. Like a sword, he had tried to do that for 3 weeks straight, with nothing but frustration as his reward. But, while in that state, his body also seemed to receive the biggest boost. Almost as if it kept charging itself with the surrounding energy. While in his full elemental state, his wounds seemed to rapidly mend themselves. Which meant he had some sort of healing ability somehow connected to his quirk. All in all, he was heavily geared towards close-quarter combat, with no ranged abilities whatsoever. Which meant that he needed to be in close proximity to villains and be proficient in hand-to-hand combat, in order to take them out. Which was why he was currently hitting the aforementioned wall. He was training various fighting techniques, into which he tried to incorporate his own quirk-related moves like his stunning strike, or his flash hit. The latter was a combination of his enhanced speed and released electricity. Combining them, he was able to generate a short bright burst of light, which was aimed to simultaneously blind his opponent and deliver a devastating blow to them. He had learned at the start of his training that he could somehow numb himself to most of the pain. It was like a switch he flipped that allowed himself to ignore the pain that his training or fighting would lead to. It was always accompanied with a slight buzzing feeling that seemed to resonate through his brain. And the more pain he suppressed, the more prominent the feeling got. For some reason, it never really seemed to completely go away. Even when he was all healed up and should be in no pain, the feeling remained. Only noticeable when he was specifically looking for it. Izuku was no idiot. He knew that he had changed since the thing inside him had broken that night. And he figured that his quirk was somehow responsible for the change in his personality and his emotions. But since he had no problems with how he changed, he did not bother to investigate it further. That was how Izuku spent the next 8 months leading up to the entrance exam. Training himself both physically and mentally. His training regime had to be cut back for the first 5 months, since he could not stay on quirk leave forever and he had to go back to finish the school year. His mother had transferred him to another school for the remainder of the year, though. She had refused to send him back to where he had been belittled and beaten for years. Without anyone doing anything about it, Izuku fell into a routine for the remaining months. He would spend his mornings and afternoons training his body and quirk, and continue to expand his knowledge on anything hero-related and his own abilities in the evenings. The more he read about heroes, both newly emerging and already established ones, the more irritated and disgusted he was with it all. Both were infuriating in their own way. And both, as far as Izuku was concerned, were no heroes, but merely pretending to be one. He was not sure which ones were worse. The established ones, who seemed to have stopped trying to better themselves, and often seemed to just wait for All Might or one of the other, top 10, heroes to resolve most crises, rather than push themselves and try to do it themselves. Or the newcomers, who appeared to be more interested in good publicity, merchandise contracts, and fame, than actual hero work. He tried to channel the resulting anger and frustration into his studies and training. But he could not stop himself from becoming cynical or angry whenever the subject came up. Be it in passing conversation or his own personal research. Sure, there were exceptions to the pretenders. But they were few and far between. Of the established ones he could only really stand Endeavor. The NR2 hero seemed to be the only one left who tried to get stronger, tried to go further, and tried to surpass the false idol All Might. The newcomers at least had heroes like the rabbit hero, Maruko, who seemed to constantly try to push herself further. But for every Maruko and Endeavor, there were uncountable others who were mere pretenders. Like MT, lady who was more interested in how to market herself than saving lives. UA was massive. Like really. The area belonging to it was several city blocks wide. It was rather mind-boggling. Izuku stood in the middle of the path leading up to the entrance hall with a hand on each strap of his backpack. He eyed up the massive building in front of him, while all around him hundreds of people made their way up to it to take the famed and feared UA entrance exam, to possibly be accepted into the best hero school in all of Japan. This was it, the first step of many towards becoming a hero. And more importantly for Izuku, the first step towards hopefully fixing the broken and rather fucked up state of hero society. Izuku made his way up the stairs and was about to enter the building when shouts further down the path behind him made him turn around. "Get the fuck out of my way, you damned extras." A blonde teen with short, spiky ash blonde hair and sharp blood-red eyes yelled while pushing his way through the mass of students who made their way towards the entrance. Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend and all-around asshole. "Nope, not gonna deal with that right now," Izuku muttered under his breath before turning around again and walked inside. The lecture hall he found himself in was massive. He quickly made his way towards his assigned seat and sat down. It should still be a few minutes until the exam officially started. Izuku was about to look around and see if he could spot any interesting quirks, when he heard the all-too-familiar voice again. This time directed towards him specifically. "What the fuck are you doing here, Deku?" Bakugo all but yelled. "Yeah, figures. Out of hundreds of people, the idiot manages to make his way towards me. I am one lucky guy," Izuku thought sarcastically before turning towards the explosive bully. He could feel his temper rise and his eyes had a barely noticeable shine to them. "Bakugo, fancy meeting you here. It's nothing special, really. I am just sitting at the moment." He could hear several people snicker around him. "What the fuck did you just say to me, Deku? Ah, so it is not just your eyes you have trouble with, then." "The ears as well," Izuku replied before adding in a stage whisper. "Or do you have problems with what's between the two? I am going to show you what a problem is, Deku. I meant what the fuck are you doing here, at the entrance exam?" But before Izuku could respond, the light in the lecture hall dimmed and a loud booming voice echoed through the room. Test. 1, 2, 3. This thing on. Great. What's up, UA candidates? Thanks for tuning in to me, your school DJ. Come on, let me hear you, the pro hero known as Present Mike shouted. He was met with stunned silence. "Keeping it mellow, huh? That's fine. I will skip straight to the main show. Let us talk about how this practical exam is going to go down, okay? Are you ready?" he yelled while striking a dramatic pose, obviously waiting for a response. And was met with silence once again. "Tough crowd, huh? Anyway, in this year's practical exam, you will be facing different kind of villains, which will be represented by robots. Designed by last year's graduating support course. You will be awarded points, depending on how dangerous said villains are. There are 4 different categories. The 1-pointers, the 3-pointers and the 5-pointers. Alright then, with that done, you will now be split into multiple groups and be brought to your designated sites." A black-haired teen with glasses stood up. "Excuse me, but didn't you say there were 4 categories of villains? You only mentioned 3, and could the 2 of you back there stop muttering and talking? It is rather distracting and very unbecoming of such a prestigious school as UA." The last part, to Izuku's confusion, appeared to be directed at him. Which was rather weird, since Izuku had not said a word since Present Mike started talking. Bakugo on the other hand had apparently not stopped quietly threatening him. How that was supposed to be Izuku's fault, was anyone's guess, though. Izuku did not have the time to respond, as Present Mike started to answer the teen's question. "Ah, yes. I knew I forgot something. You were right. There is a 4th category. The 0-pointer. But rather than gaining 0 points for defeating him, you will lose all the points you accumulated up until then if you do so. So, I would recommend avoiding it." The test site, that Izuku and around 100 other participants were brought to, was modeled after an average city district. And, like everything UA related, was massive in its proportions. Izuku was clad in the standard UA sport attire that had been given to them on their way to the exam site. But he also wore a tight-fitting shirt and boxers made of rubber-like material, which would hopefully preserve his modesty if he burned through the other clothes with his power. Maybe he really would prefer to not run around stalkers while in public. He had also taken off his boots. They would never survive all the abuse he would put them through. Izuku was about to take a closer look at the other examinees when the voice of Present Mike loudly announced the start of the exam. His eyes began to shine with white-blue light as his body partially changed into its elemental state. He took off running before the others even realized what Present Mike had said. Robots. That should not be a big obstacle. He could just fry their circuits or straight up melt parts of them if he had to. The first robot he came across was around 2 meters tall, human-like in its appearance and had guns instead of arms. And a big 3 painted across its chest. Bolts of lightning arched all around Izuku as his body fully changed. Picking up his speed, he ran towards his enemy. He jumped with a twist of his lower body, and landed crouching atop its shoulders, with both his hands atop the 3-pointer's head. He focused on his hands and feet and sent a dangerously high electrical charge through them, before pushing off and immediately start running again. The whole thing had not lasted longer than 2 seconds. And left a smoking and smoldering pile of metal behind. The next couple of robots he found, 2 3-pointers and a single 1-pointer, were disposed in a similar way. 10 points in under 5 minutes. Not too shabby, if I do say so myself. Where to now? Looking around and not seeing any more machines to take down in his immediate vicinity, Izuku ran towards the highest building in the street and started to scale the outer wall. Using his heavily boosted physical abilities, as well as melting footholds for himself where needed, he managed to reach the top in a matter of seconds. He ignored the slightly more prominent buzzing feeling in his head as he crouched on the ledge of the rooftop and studied the surrounding area. The fake city had turned into a war zone. Dozens of explosions and what appeared to be laser beams shook the buildings all over the city, and smoke slowly enveloped more and more of the streets beneath him. Spying 2 5-pointers emerging from an alley not 200 meters away from him, Izuku got up and jumped from rooftop to rooftop, swiftly heading towards his new bounty. He was about to jump down and engage the 2 heavily armed robots, when a short purple-haired girl ran between the 2 5-pointers. She wove between the attacks of the robots with elegant movements and plugged, what to Izuku's surprise appeared to be earphone jacks that were connected to her ears, into the first 5-pointer. The machine began to vibrate violently before its whole upper body exploded. Interesting. Some kind of sound-based quirk. Izuku's eyebrows rose in respect. If she was able to manipulate and receive sound waves, her quirk would be very versatile. Easily on par in destructive power with his own, but also capable of scouting and locating enemies or endangered civilians in rescue operations. Versatile and powerful indeed. While Izuku had been thinking about all possible ways to utilize her quirk, the petite girl had swiftly dealt with the second 5-pointer and looked at the destruction before her with a satisfied smirk. She was so caught up in her achievement, that she did not seem to notice the 3 5-pointers that came around the corner behind her. Izuku jumped down without hesitation and 3-point landed right between the engaging robots and the fair-skinned teen. Lightning impacted all around him as he used all the strength he had in his legs to catapult himself towards the enemy. He had to act fast. 2 of them had already locked onto the girl behind him and were about to fire their weapons. Izuku twisted his body while still being airborne, and with the thought of having to destroy all 3 of them at the same time, resorted to drastic measures. I have to use supernova. No way around it. Well, here goes my clothing. Let's just hope my rubber underwear will hold. Still in the air, Izuku pushed pure electricity out of his entire body. The air around him exploded with electricity and giant arcs of lightning impacted all around him. annihilating everything and anything in a 5-meter radius. He twisted his upper body and pulled his feet under him as he once again three-point landed in a small crater of his own making. Small pieces of burning clothing fell from his legs and shoulders as he slowly righted himself and stood up, with his back towards the vibration quirk user. His upper body was completely void of any clothing, the rubber-like material not being able to withstand the amount of energy had evaporated. His boxers thankfully had largely withstood the abuse, and aside from a few burn marks here and there were still intact. Good thing I pushed less lightning from my lower body, or I would be standing here naked. Izuku's eyes closed briefly, thanking whatever deity that had deigned to bestow him with this small mercy. He looked back over his shoulder and saw the purple-haired girl look at him with wide, shocked eyes. He nodded to her once before channeling his speed and taking off in the direction the 3 5-pointers had come from. In a room somewhere in the massive compound that was UA Academy, the teachers and benefactors of said institution were watching the exam with curious and calculating eyes on multiple screens. One of them currently showed Izuku as he was battling with an already heavily damaged 3-pointer. A very tall, wide-set man with a bulky, muscular build and lightly tanned skin, who was known to the public as Vlad King, the Blood Hero, was one of many who were currently focused on Izuku's battle. With that one down, the kid should have around 90 points on villain points alone. Impressive. He is, isn't he? Izuku Midoriya. Quirk. Living lightning, responded Principal Nezu. He received grunts and head movements in acknowledgement from the men and women around him. From all but one. In the back of the room, a skinny man with sharp, angular features, long spiky blonde hair and a slight trickle of blood at the left corner of his mouth eyed the screen with his eyes narrowed in suspicion. The NR1 hero. All Might. He knew that boy. He had met him before, and if he was not mistaken, the boy should not have a quirk. Izuku was just finishing off a 3-pointer, when Present Mike's voice once again boomed around the exam site, informing everyone that the exam would end in 5 minutes. Izuku had, as of now, destroyed 7 1-pointers and 10 3-pointers and 5-pointers respectively, bringing his points to a total of 87. Which he figured was rather impressive. He made his way towards the exit, still looking for more robots to demolish, when the ground beneath him started to shake. He did not have to look long for the source of the commotion, as a 30-meter tall and 10-meter wide robot straight up walked through a building ahead of him, throwing debris in every direction. The 0-pointer they had been warned about had emerged. Izuku was about to turn around and head in the opposite direction of the thing, when he heard a high-pitched scream of pain. He followed the sound and saw a brown-haired girl with a bob cut laying in the middle of the street. Her left foot appeared to be stuck beneath a wall-sized piece of rubble. And she was right in the way of the steadily advancing 0-pointer. Izuku's body moved without a conscious thought. He ran towards the injured girl and came to a stop right in front of her. Her large and comically round brown eyes were filled with pain and panic as she desperately tried to free her leg. Izuku went down to one knee and with every ounce of strength he possessed, tried to slowly lift the giant slab of stone. It was too heavy. He could melt parts of it off to lighten the load, but that would take too long. And he did not dare to melt too close to the girl, or he might hurt her even worse. "Hey, we need help here. Someone help me free her," Izuku shouted to the other examinees who were sporadically running around them and tried to get away from the 0-pointer. Most of them did not even give them a second glance and straight up ignored his repeated cries for help. The black-haired guy who had accused him of besmirching the prestigious name of UA earlier on, stopped running for a moment. His eyes darted between Izuku and the trapped girl to the massive robot that steadily approached them, with a conflicted expression marring his face. Izuku was about to address the teen directly, when the left leg of the gigantic robot came down between them. The glasses-wearing boy's eyes widened in shock and he too ran away towards the exit. Izuku scoffed. "Disgusting pretenders. Every last one of them. Why you should leave. There is no point in both of us dying here," came the shaky voice of the girl in front of him. Tears were slowly running down her face. "No, and no, no, I am not leaving you, and you won't die here either. Don't worry, you will make it out alive." It did not escape either of them that he had said, "you," and not, "we." Izuku's eyes began to shine as small lightning bolts escaped them. He turned away from the girl and slowly made his way towards the gigantic machine in front of them, before turning more and more into pure electricity once he was at a safe distance to the girl and began to start accelerating his speed. If he couldn't get the girl out of the way of the robot, then he had to get the robot out of the way. By any means necessary. Izuku twisted his body to the right in full sprint and barely managed to dodge the gigantic metallic fist that impacted the ground right where he had been. He jumped atop the arm and ran up its length, leaving footprints in the form of molten metal in his path. Izuku made his way around the giant's left shoulder to its neck and with powerful punches, started to melt holes into it. It took him a few seconds to make them wide enough to reach inside of the machine. He came in contact with countless cables and grabbed as many as he could with both of his hands. He pushed every ounce of power he had through his arms and hands and into the giant monstrosity that was threatening a girl's life. And had taken her smile. He would not let that happen. He might not be able to smile himself anymore, but he would be damned if he let that happen to anyone else. For the second time that day, Izuku used supernova, and the world around him was once again filled with white and blue lightning bolts that tore apart and violently destroyed anything they came in contact with. When the light of his attack faded, the robot's head and parts of its shoulders had turned into a puddle of molten metal and the rest of it slowly tilted to the side, as it lost its balance and began to fall. Just as Izuku's sight began to darken, two thoughts made its way through his brain. Good, now she can smile again. I don't think my boxers survived this one. And everything went black as he fell backwards, away from the giant robot. Izuku was no stranger to pain, physical or otherwise. Throughout the years he had been beaten, kicked, scratched at and burned to a degree that he should have been a permanent resident of a hospital. That being said, he had a very high tolerance for pain. Even before he was able to tune it out with his quirk. But when he regained consciousness he felt like he had been hit by a truck. Repeatedly, and then been thrown off a bridge. And a tall one at that. Every single part of his body was hurting. And it felt like he had been drained of every last bit of energy. The first thing his pain-addled mind was able to perceive were the muted voices that silently echoed in the air around him. He was not able to make out any specific words, but recognized his mother's voice. And if his ears did not betray him, which they very well might, she appeared to be quite angry. He was not quite sure with whom or why, though. He managed to slowly open his eyes for a few brief seconds before the bright light forced him to close them again. Izuku was tempted to let the darkness embrace him again, when someone suddenly started to speak from right next to him. "Ah, finally awake, are you? You gave us quite the fright," said a brittle and old-sounding voice. Izuku opened his mouth and tried to talk, but all he was able to accomplish was a hoarse-sounding groan. "Here, drink this first." Then try to talk again. Izuku felt something cold touch his lips and took a few painful gulps of whatever the voice directed him to drink. Good. Give it a few moments, before you try to talk again, boy. You put your body under quite a bit of stress. And my quirk really did not help the matter. When the mysterious voice said the last part, it almost sounded apologetic. Izuku slowly opened his eyes again, and while the light did send another jolt of pain through his brain, he still managed to keep them open, and with a lot of willpower he managed to face the direction the voice came from. Right next to the bed he was laying on stood a short, elderly woman with gray hair styled into a bun. She wore a white lab coat and a dress with red and yellow stripes at either side. She was currently leaning on a syringe-styled walking stick and seemed to look at Izuku with a very stern look. How's the girl? She safe? Izuku's voice sounded hoarse and brittle to his own ears. The elderly woman's gaze softened and her lips formed into a slight smile. If you mean Miss Uraraka, then yes. She had a few broken bones, but that is nothing that could not be fixed with a quick kiss. The bit about the kiss was confusing, but Izuku could not help but be relieved. The girl was fine. He had managed to save her. She actually just left a couple of hours ago. The girl seemed quite determined to stick around and thank you. But you steadfastly refused to wake up. That is all right. No need to thank me anyway. Where are we? How long was I unconscious? With every word it seemed to be a bit easier for Izuku to talk, and his voice slowly returned to the way it normally sounded. And is that my mother yelling out there? Izuku added with a glance to the door. You are still at UA. Specifically inside UA's hospital ward. And you have been unconscious for close to 7 hours. And yes, your mother is currently talking with Principal Nezu and All Might. Izuku frowned and his eyes narrowed at the last part. What exactly was All Might doing here? And what was he doing outside of his hospital room? And how had they managed to get his mother to yell at them? Scratch that. It probably had to do with All Might being there. Mrs. Midoriya, I do understand that you are upset. Abu. Principal Nezu tried to placate the furious woman in front of him, but was interrupted before he could even finish the sentence. The petite woman looked at the principal and the other man with narrowed eyes. Upset? I'm not upset in the slightest about your failure to keep the participants of your entrance exam safe. Or the fact that you rely on said participants to literally save each other's life. I am absolutely livid, came the hissed interruption of Inko Midoriya. And you still have not told me what that man is doing here. Or why he wants to see my son so badly. Inko could barely hold back the contempt when she pointed that out. Both Principal Nezu and All Might had both been slightly taken aback when they had been faced with the thinly concealed hostility. The tiny woman in front of them seemed to downright loathe the NR. One hero. All Might is here because he has a quirk quite similar to your son's own quirk, and expressed his willingness to help. Nezu could see, based on the raised eyebrows, that his attempt to explain why All Might wanted to see her son was not well received. All Might's quirk lets him transform into pure electricity, Inko asked without hiding her disbelief. Not quite, you see it's more like. So his quirk lets him transform into another kind of element, then. Inko was close to laugh in the tiny principal's face. For some reason they refused to tell her the truth about why they were here, and that, combined with the fact that her son was at the moment lying unconscious in the room behind her, severely grated on her nerves. Her voice was deceptively quiet when she addressed them once again. Since his quirk seems to have absolutely no resemblance to my son's quirk at all, and you seem to be unwilling to explain to me why he seems to so desperately want to get into a room with my son, I see no reason to let him in. And that is my final decision." Inko folded her arms in front of her and looked at the principal with a raised eyebrow, as if challenging him to defy her. When neither of the two men said anything, she turned around, aiming to open the door to her son's hospital room. "Are you coming, Principal Nezu, or were you only saying you had to talk to my son in order to get him inside the room?" She saw him throw an intrigued look to the tall man next to him before he answered her. "Yes, I indeed would like to talk to the hero of the hour when he wakes up." The door in front of her opened and the youthful heroine, Recovery Girl, stood in front of her. "When you are finished putting these two idiots in their place, I think you would like to see your son. He woke up a couple of minutes ago." Inko looked over to the bed her son had been lying in for the last 7 hours. She felt her eyes begin to grow wet as she ran over to him and enveloped him into a tight hug. She felt her son's arms slowly envelope her in a loose embrace. Inko let herself enjoy the sound of Izuku's beating heart for a few seconds and fought back the tears that now threatened to spill from her eyes. She leaned back and took a closer look at him. He still looked way too pale and worn out. And according to the slight wince when she moved back, he was still in a lot of pain. But he was alive, and that was what counted in the end. Inko smiled up at him. "I am so proud of you, Izuku. You are not even enrolled in a hero academy yet and you already saved a life. You already are a great hero." She saw how small bolts of lightning inside her son's eyes began to make them shine a little brighter. And as soon as she saw them, Inko knew that her son would be all right. From the moment she had seen the signs of his quirk being active again, she noticed how his movements had become fluid once more and the pained winces she had seen before when he had moved to hug her had vanished. He looked at her with slightly shining eyes and hugged her a little bit tighter. "Thank you, Mom. Thanks for saying that." She felt him once again slightly tighten the hug before releasing her when she heard the principal's voice address her son. Izuku looked at the tiny mouse, dog, bear, who had introduced himself as Principal Nezu, before proceeding to congratulate him on his performance in the entrance exam and his confrontation with the zero-pointer. And then further explained that the girl, Uraraka, if he remembered correctly, had never been in any real danger to begin with, and that it had been a test to see how the hero hopefuls would react. Izuku's remained calm on the outside, but he was secretly seething. "So, you are telling me that you had absolute control over everything that happened in the exam and could have turned off every single robot there if needed. And you therefore believe that no one was ever in any real danger?" His voice was calm, if a bit strained, but that could have been associated with his beaten-up state. "Yes, exactly. But we were all very impressed with how you handled the situation." "Well done indeed." Nezu's voice and face were cheerful as he talked to him. But the small animal's expression had soon turned into a frown and his eyes had widened when Izuku had asked his next questions. What would have happened if the piece of wall had been flung half a meter higher? "Are you telling me that you controlled how the rubble of the destroyed houses was thrown around? Because if you did and you intentionally threw half a fucking wall at that girl to severely injure her just to make a point and entice others to help her, then you are fucking mental." The principal looked at him with wide eyes and a half-open mouth. But Izuku was not done yet. "And if you were not in control of that, then she could have very well died if she had been half a meter closer to the zero-pointer or if the piece of rubble had been flung half a meter higher. It would have crushed her upper body instead of her legs. So which one is it?" Izuku was glad he had no energy left, because if he had, he was sure that the room around him would have been filled with electricity. But as it was, he could barely sustain his pain suppression as he kept talking. And all this talk about secret rescue points. That just seems counterproductive. By not announcing the fact that there are multiple ways of gaining points and passing the exam, those with quirks not geared towards fighting or destroying things will never have the time to do anything else but focus even harder on fighting since they are already at a disadvantage. They would barely have time to go out of their way to help others when they are already struggle to get enough points themselves. Hero works does not solely consist of fighting others. And with this kind of exam you are limiting yourself to only quirks with combat applications. The small creature in front of Izuku seemed shocked and a little angry at himself and bowed in apology when he answered. That is something we did not take into account. It seems in our attempt to make the exam harder and more challenging, we failed to think about everything you just pointed out. I am really sorry for having put you in this situation. It's not me who you should apologize to. At least not only me. Yes, you are quite right. We will have to apologize to Miss Uraraka as well. Izuku nodded. The state of hero society had to be worse than he already thought, if the pro-heroes and state officials had not been able to see the obvious problems with the exam. UA's principal shook himself before he presented Izuku with a large envelope. We normally do not announce who passed until a week before the term starts, but I think it would be alright to make an exception here. Izuku looked at the folded piece of paper in his hands. As the highest-ranked participant in this year's entrance exam, we happily accept you into UA Academy. Izuku walked up to UA's entrance gate and followed the path to the study hall where most of his regular classes and his homeroom class would be. It was the second week of April and the official beginning of his first term in the hero course at UA High School. The weeks following the entrance exam had been filled with resting and recuperating as much of his strength as possible. It had taken him a little over a week of resting and refraining from training to regenerate enough energy to be able to enter his elemental state again. Apparently burning through most of his energy at the exam and then being subjected to a healing quirk that used the recipient's life force to heal the body had left him so exhausted that he did not have enough energy to activate most of his quirk. He walked down the hall towards the floor where most of the first-year classes were situated and made his way towards the room with a big 1A written next to it. He could already hear muted voices from down the hall, and the closer he got, the louder and more recognizable they became. He opened the door and was faced with a bunch of students standing at the far left of the classroom in a semicircle around a pair of arguing students. You cannot put your feet atop the table. This is not a respectable way to behave at such a great and prestigious school as UA Academy. You have to honor and respect all the great heroes who came before us and used them to further their education and become the great people that they did. Izuku cursed his luck. The annoying pretender who had accused him of besmirching UA's reputation at the entrance exam presentation appeared to be in his class. Great. Just great. Next up is probably Bakig. You are kidding me, right? Your old school put a stick up your ass. Where'd you go before this? Some fancy schmancy private school. And there he was. That one was on him. He really did jinx himself with that train of thought. Let's start over. I am Tenya Iida from the Sumi Private Academy. Yeah, knew it. Some rich kid who's too good for the rest of us, Get lost glasses. Izuku groaned and resigned himself to at least 3 years of having to deal with those two idiots. He started to move to an empty chair at the other side of the room, when he felt a pair of arms wrap around him and envelop him in a hug. He was about to take a hold of them and twist his way out of the unfamiliar arms, when the person embracing him started to quite loudly and enthusiastically talk into his back. "It's you, isn't it? The guy who faced down the zero-pointer. Thank you so much for what you did for me. Thank you. I will never forget it. I swear." She released him from her embrace and walked around him until she was facing him. "That was so cool how you fought the giant robot. You were all like boom bang and the robot was like arg meep. And you just melted its head off. It's all right. There really is no need to thank me. I just did what everyone should have done, and as it turned out, there never really was any real danger from the robot. Well, at least after you were already hit by that wall." Izuku slowly raked his right hand through his hair. "And thank you for, complimenting my fighting style. Oh, but you were the only one to actually try and help. So I really need to thank you for that. And, it's you, the boy with the green hair from the entrance exam. You figured out that there were rescue points and that there was no real danger from the zero-pointer, didn't you? That's why you charged in there. You must indeed be quite intelligent. I shall strive to one day see through these illusions myself." Izuku just stared at the pompous boy in front of him. Did he hear that right? That pretender ignored his own selfishness and cowardice and accused him to only have taken the risk because he already knew that there would be nothing to fear. Arcs of lightning shot through Izuku's eyes and they had a noticeable shine to them as the air around him charged itself from the excess electricity that poured out of his body. The other discussions around the three of them had stopped and all eyes were on them. First of all, it does not matter what the circumstances are. When you see someone who needs help, you help them. That is what heroes are for. Izuku's voice was laced with anger and barely suppressed power as he narrowed his eyes. Second of all, are you implying that I am a pretender such as yourself, who walks around and talks about being a hero, but at the first sign of trouble abandons the people in need? Because for all you knew, there was a girl in need of help who was about to be trampled to death by a giant fucking robot. And you ran away. Do not try to justify your own cowardice and unheroic behavior with flimsy logic that an 8-year-old could see through. The tall black-haired teen looked at him in shock. His eyes wide and his mouth open. If it were up to me, you would not be here. Since you clearly do not understand what being a hero is all about. You are just another pretender. Now if you would be so kind to leave me to the talk I had with Miss Uraraka here, before you so rudely butted into our conversation. The room was void of any sound when Izuku had stopped talking. Everyone was staring at the three of them with wide eyes and shock written all over their faces. They were startled out of their silent state of shock when a gruff voice from behind them broke the tense atmosphere. "Okay, everyone. We are going to skip the orientation and we will be doing a quirk apprehension test instead. So everyone go grab their sport attire and head out to the PE grounds."